Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 306 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson Mummy. Glad to be with you. Hope that you're well and safe. We have a lot of information to cover on today's episode of the podcast. If this is your first time with us, welcome. We're glad you're here. Glad you found us. Our podcasts are produced in video and audio format. If you'd like to watch the video, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/306. That's the episode number. And if you want to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, radio.com, lots of places where podcasts are syndicated. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the episodes. Now, I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by my co-host, Megan Saya, and we're going to be talking about three topics today specifically. We had not necessarily intended to venture into some of these things, but a few things came up late in the week, and we wanted to make sure we talked about them. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about updates to the July 2020, September 2020 exams. We want to update you on all the changes that have occurred in the past week. We're also going to take an in-depth dive at the new rules for online testing that California has implemented for their first-year law school exam. We think that that may be a precursor to what we see on the bar exam generally in the states that are planning to do online tests. So I think you're going to want to stick around for that. It's an interesting discussion. We're also going to talk about how you keep your focus in the midst of all of the chaos that's going on around us right now. Following the death of George Floyd, we certainly have seen an enormous amount of upheaval and emotional concern from our students and from everyone, I think, that's around the country and certainly involved in the rule of law. And so we talk about that as well. And I think it's an important conversation to have. So I hope you'll stay for that. And then we finish up with a discussion of some late-breaking news. The ABA has announced 10 law schools that have not complied with the requirements in order to remain accredited for the bar exam. So we're going to give some brief discussion of that early breaking news as well. So there's a lot coming up ahead. And we had planned to do an interview this week with a successful bar taker. We're going to postpone that as part of the podcast episode to keep the length manageable this week. But I promise you we've got some great interviews coming, and I don't think you're going to want to miss those either. Now, if you are getting ready to take the bar exam, either now in 2020 or in 2021, I want to let you know about a free training webinar that we're offering that I think is really valuable. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowds and the Fear. And this is a 60-minute training session in which we talk about the particular approach that we think repeat bar takers and non-traditional bar takers want to be following in this current climate and environment in order to maximize their opportunity to pass the bar exam. We're offering the training a couple times a week, and you can register for free just by clicking on the button in the show notes here for the video or the audio of the podcast, or by going to our webpage at celebrationbarreview.com/now. You'll find all the details there. Now, for me, I think the best part of this training is at the end, I do a live question and answer session with the people that are on the training to answer any questions that they've got about their particular jurisdiction or about the strategy that we're offering and suggesting. And it's been really a wonderful opportunity to interact with folks and be able to get the most current information out to you. Again, we're going to be doing these sessions typically Saturdays and Tuesdays. So just check in the show notes or go to celebrationbarreview.com/now and join us for this training. I think it could be incredibly valuable for you. And I think you'll certainly want to stick around for the Q&A at the end when we can answer any questions that you've got about your situation or about your jurisdiction or about how to implement this particular strategy. And by the way, it's a strategy that seems to be working incredibly well for people. So I really want to encourage you to join us for that. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion that we held with our students, along with my co-host, Megan, as we began to talk about what's going on in the world here at the end of May and the beginning of June. Hi, Megan, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Doesn't it seem weird? In some ways, it seems like the end of May has come very quickly, and yet it's very slowly. This would have been day one of the boot camp today.
Oh gosh, that makes me sad.
Makes me sad too. I would have been in a room with you and June and a bunch of other folks, and so someday we'll be back to that. But
Yes,
we're
yeah,
here. We're here virtually today, right? So
we are.
start by saying that the exam results season from February 2020 is now finished. I think, right, Megan? Are we done with all the jurisdictions?
I believe so. It feels like how could there possibly be any left? It's
Yeah.
been a long
And this is going to be even weirder when we talk about the July exam, because those results will spill into the September, which will then be the early September results and then the late September results. And oh my goodness, I think we've got a lot of results coming over the long period of time. But all of those results are now in. So we've sort of shifted our focus entirely now into the next set of exams. And so we've got a lot going on there. Next week, as we turn into June, doesn't it seem weird that we're so close to the exam, right?
Yeah, it does. And especially because for a lot of people, we're not close to the exam. So it's this very odd with these September exams kind of
Yeah. It's
strange trick. We live in a world of normally of just 2 times a year. And it's very odd right now to be staring at 3 exam dates within a span of a couple months. It's a very odd, odd thing.
Yeah. So there you go. We have been talking each week about the updates to the bar exam with respect to coronavirus. We have a few of those this week. The pace of change has slowed down a little bit, would you say?
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes. Most states have now already made their determinations of when they're going to give the exam. And so we're really kind of looking now at kind of as for those states that had said, oh, we'll make a decision later. A couple of them have started making those decisions. But yeah, it's getting a lot more settled now, which is comforting and helpful.
It is. And I think that one of the things that people need to keep in mind is that while some states have settled on what they're doing, they're all reserving the right to move and switch. And there are still major parts of big states that have not made any decisions at all. They've just said, well, broadly, here's what we plan to do, but they haven't given details. So there's still a lot happening. It's just not these massive shifts that say we're giving an exam or not an exam, but there is still a lot going on. We're going to talk about some of that today. But why don't you kick us off, Megan, with just some updates of what we do know, announced changes in the last week since we talked.
Yeah, so I think as you were saying, New Hampshire kind of came out, and I believe they sent an email to all the students who had registered so far for the bar in New Hampshire and basically said, we just can't promise you, go ahead and register, but we can't promise you that you're actually going to be taking the exam in September. And I have to say, I appreciate the honesty that they're basically just laying all the cards out on the table and saying, this is, as far as we know, this is our plan, but we just cannot promise you for sure that this is going to be able to happen in actuality. So there was something refreshing about a state finally just saying, we're not in control of this virus and we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like.
Yeah, and we got some reaction from New Hampshire students saying, well, now what do I do? So what's the advice there? If you're in New Hampshire, if you're in any state where you're getting, in essence, that same message, what do you do?
So I think do what they say, which is to register. If that's where, if they've got registration open to you, some states will not allow you to register if you don't meet specific criteria. But for anywhere where you meet the criteria that you'd want to take the exam, go ahead and register, knowing that they will move you around as necessary. And in most of these states we're seeing, they're giving people the option to defer to February exams. So just like with Celebration Bar Review, we're not charging any deferral fees. It's okay. So if you go ahead and register for the July or the September exam, whatever is being given, and it turns out that the state defers you to the February 2021, there's nothing bad on our end that's coming. So we're with you through till whenever you can take the bar. So it's okay. But yeah, so I would go ahead and sign up for the one that fits you best, and then we'll pivot with you. You're not alone. If you end up having to have a change of plans, we're with you in it. You're not going to be left, wondering, well, now what do I do?
Yeah, I think the only way you really get caught in this scenario is if you become distracted and you decide not to study, and then you realize that test date becomes open to you and you really aren't prepared. Now, in that scenario, if you're a student of ours, you can still defer. I mean, as Megan said, we're not penalizing anybody for anything. You can defer as often or as much as you need to. We recognize the weirdness of this circumstance. But I think in general, you should assume that the exam will happen until told otherwise, and you should study as though it's going to happen until told otherwise. So New Hampshire was a little more forthcoming than some other states, but certainly not the only state that's waffling, right?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got 2 state updates this week. So significantly fewer states have made specific changes than in the past few weeks that we've seen. So we've just got Maryland. They decided on no July exam, and then they have what they call tentatively scheduled for September 9th and 10th. So that's not a surprise if you're in Maryland. It's kind of been looking like it's trending that way in the state for a while. So just know that absolutely they're not doing the July exam, and then they're hoping to do September 9th and 10th. But again, they're one of the states that's being a bit more clear on, we're not totally sure, but go ahead. And if Maryland makes sense for you, try and register for the September 9th and 10th. And if it gets pushed back, then that's okay. We'll readjust. If you really feel like you have to take it in September, then Maryland might not be the state for you if you can take a different.
Yeah, and Maryland's a UBE state, as is New Hampshire. So you've got options here. If you don't want to be in those states, you don't have to sit in those states for your score to apply in those states. So again, I think a UBE jurisdiction gives you a lot more options than a standalone state in this regard. So that's interesting. Yeah, what else we got?
And then the only other one is Utah. So they said, I think yesterday, for applicants who don't qualify for what they're calling the alternative pathway, which would probably be most of our students would not qualify for that, or for those who just want to take the bar exam rather than do the alternative pathway, the court said that they intend, again, with that kind of, we're seeing a bit more of the hedging language, intends to offer the exam on September 30th through October 1st. So
yeah, so they push back.
Yeah, Utah pushed back September 30th through October 1st administration for anybody who either doesn't qualify for or doesn't want to use the alternative pathway. So.
Yeah, and this alternative pathway essentially is if you've never taken the bar exam before and you graduated in 2019 and you've fulfilled a certain number of service hours with a licensed attorney in Utah. I mean, it's a very narrow subset. So as you said, Megan, virtually no one that's on this call or listening to the podcast later is going to qualify for that. But that's the date there. So those were the only states that made definitive announcements. But there's also obviously been a lot of maneuvering going on, some of which is closer to the surface and some of which is behind. Let me talk about Florida for a minute, because I think there's an interesting development in Florida, which is that we know that admission tickets were sent out, at least to some people, in the last week in Florida. You might recall that Florida has announced 2 locations, which is the first for them, at Tampa and Orlando. Well, we assumed that either people would get to choose a location or they'd be assigned a location. Florida has done neither so far. They've just said, here's your admission ticket, and they haven't said which location you're going to or how they're going to make that choice. So, of course, for those who have to make travel arrangements, it's a little dicey. I will tell you, here's the good news if you're not up on your Florida geography. Florida, Tampa and Orlando are about an hour apart. Celebration is right in between them. But they're about an hour apart. We don't even know the location in Orlando that's being talked about. We think it's the convention center, but it could be a Disney location. There are plenty of Disney hotels. We're not expecting Disney World to reopen until middle of July, but the exam end of July still. So it could be kind of weird that way. But we don't know what Florida's doing. I mean, frankly, and if you got an admission ticket and it didn't say Tampa or Orlando, which is what we're hearing, then just sit tight. They'll let you when they're good and ready to let you, apparently. Until then, I don't know. So that's a little bit of the weirdness that we're seeing. And we're kind of getting that flavor in some other states, aren't we? Where they're not exactly telling people what's going on. They're just kind of going forward, and then you have to guess. I think that would be a good way to talk about New York too, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, New York finished out their registration for people who met that very narrow New York recent law grads from New York law schools. And so they close that out, but then they have yet to reopen any windows and really to tell people what's going on with that. So still waiting on that to see if they had any extra seats available or what's going to happen if anybody who doesn't meet that narrow criteria is going to be able to register, or if they're going to all wait until February 2020.
Yeah, and these would be primarily first-time takers who went to New York law schools. I mean, exclusively, I think, at this point. And so I'm not terribly worried because I don't think that's really our audience. But I would say that as far as we know, they haven't told those group of applicants where their locations are yet either. So who knows? I mean, it's one of those things where I think they're trying to sort it all out. When they get it sorted out, then they'll say, okay, we move to step number 2. Maybe we move to step number 2, or maybe we stop at this point. And they're not the only state that's doing that. I mean, Tennessee is going through this priority application. Some other states, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know we've got some other states doing priority applications. And where there's multiple locations of the exam, it looks like that may be part of what's happening there as well. I also think a lot of these states are going to be offering, almost certainly, a option to switch out of the exam in July or September into February 2021. And I want to talk about that for just a minute, because I know that that seems like a pretty tempting offer, right? Hey, it's all crazy and weird, and if you want to jump into February 2021, you can do it. I think there are two different considerations here, and Megan, feel free to jump in. The first is the health consideration. If you're anxious or nervous about being in the testing environment in July or September, and you just don't feel like you would be comfortable because of the health reasons, then by all means you should sit out and wait. I mean, I think that certainly makes sense. But the second, but assuming that so if you're an old person like me, and I would have some nervousness about going into a big room like in Tampa or Orlando. Some other jurisdictions, it's going to be still pretty small rooms and maybe more reasonable. But then the second consideration is the strategy of taking the bar exam. And I think if you can sit for the exam in July or September, you are still better off taking the exam in July or September, because so many of the high achieving bar takers, the first time bar takers, the 3Ls and 4Ls, are going to sit it out, as well as a whole bunch of other people. I mean, there's just going to be a lot fewer people taking the exam. I'm still standing by my number of about 25,000 bar takers nationally when we add up all 3 dates, as compared to about 45,000 most years in July. So that's a huge movement of people away from a competitive world. And so I think that it's to your advantage to take the exam. And I wouldn't take I feel like let's make a deal, right? Behind door number 2 is the February 21 exam. It's not a bad choice, but I don't think you should feel like you have to take it. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, this is such a personal choice. So I think our stance is we're encouraging people to take it as soon as they can. But certainly part of that as soon as you can calculus is what is safe and healthy and do you feel comfortable with. If you are someone who has a lot of anxiety and would have difficulty emotionally dealing with taking a test in a mask, being in a room and going through all the medical checks and things like that beforehand, then you've got to weigh that. And definitely that's why we're allowing people to defer. Yep. There's cost that understand if for you personally, it is not the right choice, you need to make the right choice for you. So, and we can't tell you what that is.
Right.
But
I think that's exactly right, Megan. And there's another interesting piece to this, which is that we're not yet certain how the exams are going to be scored in this triad of 3 tests. And what I mean by that is you're going to have a July 28th exam, then you're going to have a September 9th and 10th, then you're going to have a September 30th, October 1st. They're going to get scores back from the July exam before the September tests. That's what's been said in most jurisdictions. So that exam is going to be graded on its own merits and equated and compared to everyone taking the exam in July of 2020. However, when we get to September 9th and September 30th, it's not clear that there are going to be enough bar takers yet in either of those 2 exam administrations by themselves to equate the score. I am beginning to think that what the NCBE's got in mind here is that they will take that September 9th test and they will go back in time to the July grouping, and they'll equate back and add it in as though it was part of the July test, and they'll do the same thing for September 30th. In other words, they won't stand just on the merits of that one date by itself. Now, it's a little geeky, I realize. Megan, you're not giving me a normal eye roll when I start going off into this, but the reality is that this is going to impact scoring, or potentially impact scoring, depending on how they decide to equate the test. And this is something that I'm watching for very carefully. I don't expect it to be a headline across social media, but it will be an interesting decision that's made, because it will impact scores, and it could impact them by a few points either way. So I just want everybody to have their radar up a little bit for this, particularly if you're sitting in the September 9th jurisdiction or September 30th jurisdiction. How will that be as compared to a February 2021 jurisdiction? Well, we don't know. I mean, there's no real way to tell that at this point, but it's out there, and it's got some possibilities. So a little geeky, isn't it?
That's okay.
Okay.
All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is we got the rules from the California first year exam, which is going to be given online in June. So we're fast approaching that. And I want to talk about it for a little bit because it's a bit instructive. We don't know for sure that these will be the same rules for the California online September full bar exam or for the other jurisdictions that are doing online exams, but it's the first kind of hint we've gotten, I'll say, for what it might look like. And there's a lot in here that's really interesting. So this would be, as of right now, California is planning for an online exam, Nevada, Michigan, Indiana, and maybe Massachusetts. So that's where we're talking with these online exams. Now, I will say, who knows what this is going to look like moving forward. As we know, things are moving quickly. So this is maybe applicable to everyone, particularly moving forward, to see what kind of happens as we go on.
Yeah. And this is the first written out rules, which is why we're going to spend some time on it. Even though very few of you are California first year students in June 2020, we think this might be the leading edge of where online testing is going. And let's just warn everybody before we get into it, you're not going to like what you have to hear. This is pretty restrictive. So why don't you want to take some highlights of these rules?
Yeah, so I think some things that stood out to me when I read it. One are the room requirements. So you're going to have to be in a closed room, and that room cannot have any pets. So if you have, particularly I'm thinking people with like cats and stuff, like you would probably want to have someone else take your pet because if they enter the room, even if you did not let them in, but they are so clever and they push that door open, that's it, you're disqualified. So I would probably, if you have any pets, I would remove them from the home if possible for the exam. Then also you can have no books in the room. So this is difficult. I know. I mean, yeah, it's, I don't know if you can see. I think for most people, their desk is in their home. If they have a desk, is also a place where they have books. That would make sense. So you will need to remove all the books from that room, the entire room. So that means, and since it has to be in a closed door one, if that might mean for you that you need to like take the exam in your bedroom. So you're going to need to go through and do a sweep and pull things out. Also, I mean, there's already obviously people upset about what do I do if I live in a studio apartment? So you will have to find another place to take the exam. So start thinking now, if you're one of these jurisdictions, especially if you're California, if you're planning on taking the California bar in September, I would start talking to friends, family. Hey, do you have a room in your house that I could use to take this test if you don't have the right requirements for it?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to prep a room. You're going to have to take everything out of the room. I mean, and when I say everything, I mean everything. There can't be any electronic devices. There can't be any cell phones. There can't be any iPads. There can't be any books. There can't be any papers. If anyone comes into the room, your partner has to use the bathroom and they come through, that's it, you're done. No one can be in this room. And you cannot leave the room in this baby bar structure, right?
Yeah.
You have to sit for 1 hour for every time.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So the way they're doing it is rather than giving you the full amount of time to complete all your essays, they are broken up each essay into a specific time slot. You will write one essay and you cannot leave. You will write one essay and then you will finish, and then you will take a break, and then you will come back and do the second. So that means if you're a California student, I want you practicing right now that you do not go give yourself a little extra time to write one essay and then give yourself a little less for the next. You are not going to have that option if they keep this same rule for you. So that means if you're used to, oh, I've got fudge time, I can spend 2 extra minutes on this essay because I'll just give myself 2 less on the next. You will not have that option. You will not be able to toggle back and forth between essays. So that is a huge change if they keep that for the California September exam. So please start practicing with that. That's a really big deal thing. And then also, yes, you're going to have to stay. You're not going to be able to have like run to the bathroom and come back in the middle. You're going to have to stay until it's the break times. I believe you can finish early in terms of the essay, but then that's it. You can't come back to that essay. So
right, you can't come back in. Right, exactly. So, I mean, for some of you, I mean, maybe we're looking at adult depends. I don't know. This is a really, and by the way, you can't bring water or coffee. I don't think I could, between the books and the coffee, I don't think I could do that in the 1 hour.
Well, for the multiple choice sessions, they're splitting it into 2 90-minute sessions. And so with that scheduled 15-minute break, so you can't leave the view of your webcam unless you're done, like you have to be done. So you can only leave the view of the webcam if you're done with it. So again, that's 90 minutes of sitting there without, you cannot stand up. You've got to, that webcam's got to be able to see you the entire time. So you need to practice that now if you are taking the California exam in September. Because again, we don't know, this might crash and burn and it's not going to be the rule in September, but as of right now, this is what the California bar wants for the baby bar.
Well, and then there's the thing that's really causing, I mean, everything we've talked about so far should make you like, but now we're going to give you the real kicker. Go ahead, yeah. Megan.
Okay, so it really stinks. Their last rule is if an applicant's internet connection disconnects or malfunctions for any reason, the applicant will not be allowed to re-enter the exam session. So this is not ExamSoft. This is not an ExamSoft thing. ExamSoft can function briefly off, like it can function offline and then you just reconnect online to upload. For this, they are saying if your internet goes out, no matter how briefly, you are done. You can't take the rest of the exam. So I don't even know what to say about that. Except I'm sorry. That really stinks because this is not something that you necessarily have control over. So if you have spotty internet, you need to find someone else who you can take the exam at their home, or you need to figure out if you can get a better pay extra for that month to get the faster internet, get a better modem, like whatever it is. And I hate it because it's like you could do everything right and it could kick, my internet, as you guys see with this webinar, I get kicked off routinely from the webinar. And that's it. And so I'm really frustrated about that, but know that a lot of people are really frustrated. And so I would anticipate that there will be some pushback against this. But I don't know. I don't know if they're going to.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think one of the things is that the bar examiners kind of assumed that they could kind of slide this in under the radar because it was first year bar takers. I imagine as you and I talk about it, and not to suggest that our podcast is disseminated to millions, but it does go out to thousands. And as people start to hear about this, I suspect there's going to be more discussion and more sense of, are you kidding me? And if we saw this in Indiana or Nevada or Massachusetts, these are really problematic requirements. And I understand they're trying to be secure, but there is just no way to make it 100% secure. I think this is one of the reasons that the NCBE just doesn't want to give the multi-state online because, look, it's draconian. If your internet blips for a minute, for a second, you're gone. As soon as that connection is broken, that's it. Test is over for you. You failed. And so that means that if the kids have their devices on, or you've got a spouse or a partner who's deciding to stream Netflix, it's all over. you've got to be virtually secluded, cloistered, the only person in the space. I mean, literally, no pets, no people, no books, no digital devices, no clocks, no water, no coffee. This is pretty onerous stuff. And you might say, well, can I go take the exam in person? Well, there's a whole series of requirements that you have to attest to that claim that you're exempt from doing the test online. And it's going to be virtually impossible, I think, for people to qualify under those as well. So my personal sense is that the examiners floated this as a trial balloon. We'll see what the reaction is to it. I suspect there will be a lot of pushback. And California first-year baby bar students are the least powerful people in the entire bar exam universe. It's a sad truth, but that's the reality. And their schools and their deans are not the ones who are going to be able to have much weight. When the dean at Stanford Law School says something, well, I think that carries a little more weight. So the reality is that the examiners, I think, took the most draconian position they could. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if the examiners back off of any of these rules, and we'll certainly but this is it was a jaw dropper for me. How about you?
Yeah, definitely. I just think this is so many ways that you could be disqualified. It's just, I mean, yeah, it's very, very frustrating. And that's certainly why I would say Nevada, the option to just say, we're doing an open book, because then they do not care about most of the things on that list. But if you're going to make it a closed book test online, I mean, you practically have to be in an empty room. Like, I mean, and to be quite honest, if you're doing this, I would suggest, like you said, I would empty everything you possibly can out of the room. You do not want to give them any reason to even look twice, right? Like, you just want it to be nothing anywhere in that room, so that there's nothing that they could potentially call back and say, well, you looked sort of suspiciously like to the left a lot. And it's like, oh, no, I just was thinking. But it's like, well, what was over there? Just, you want to make it like there's nothing in this room at all. Don't for any reason. Yeah,
and I know some people out there think online testing is going to be the panacea. I think this is where the devil is in the details. I think we're going to see that. Now, look, if you are a California, Massachusetts, Indiana, Nevada bar taker, you should assume at this moment that these rules might be applied to you. They're the most draconian they can be, as I said, but you should start preparing for that set of rules, which means you need to start finding the modem and the internet applications. You need to start making the arrangements to get the pets and the family out. You need to start moving stuff out of your room that you're going to use. So there's nothing on your desk. There's no devices. There's no clocks. There's nothing.
No paper.
No paper, nothing. You can't have anything. I mean, nothing.
And not on your desk, in the room. And that's the key with this, is like, it's not just I won't have it on my workspace. It is literally nowhere in the room.
Nowhere in the room. So start now. I guess that's our point. The California bar is September 9th and 10th. Yeah. And for some of you, you think that's a long way away. I'll just tell you that it's not. And so you should start that process now. And then we'll hear, unfortunately, I don't think California will make an announcement about this until after they've done the June 2020 first year exam. So we literally will have a very short period of time to transition to whatever's going to be done. And then we'll watch these other states. But my guess is the other states will watch California's experience in June, because that's the first opportunity to see how a really online proctored bar exam goes. So stay tuned. That's a lot of fun, isn't it? So, okay.
And we had a student question about kind of all these requirements for California, and that just doesn't sound like something that the student would be able to do, understandably. So they said, I'm trying to brainstorm for alternative locations. What do you think?
Yeah, California is really interesting because there are two groups of students in California, three. There are ABA accredited law grads who could sit anywhere in the country and choose for whatever reason to sit in California. A second group are California law school grads, either online or state accredited or unaccredited, who can only sit in California. And the third group are foreign trained attorneys who can sit in California or some other states like New York or Texas or Washington State. If you're in that first grouping, the ABA accredited law school student, Our advice to you will be the same as it's been for the past couple of years. Leave California, get out of California. The exam is ridiculously difficult. The testing score is way too high for passing. There were, what did we have, 1,100 passing students in the February exam, 25% pass rate. It's a mess. That's the nicest thing we can say about it. When you add the question of online testing, I think it makes it messier still. So if you have the option to get out of California for this sequence of exams, go take the exam somewhere else. Go to a UBE jurisdiction, take the test, get licensed in 38 states, and then come back and take California later if you want. If you are a foreign trained attorney and you have the option, New York isn't going to be an option for you this fall as a foreign trained attorney. That's just not going to happen. I think we're pretty clear on that. But there are some other states that will allow you to sit, and you need to check that out. And we've been telling people to go to the National Conference's website. It's ncbex.org. And there are the rules and requirements for foreign legal education. You should check those out and then look at some of those states. Time is moving quickly, but you should look at getting out of California as well. And I know some foreign trained attorneys are thinking, this is great. Online, I don't have to fly to the US. I get it. Just make sure you're able to, deal with all of this. But it would still be my recommendation to get out of California. Now that leaves us with that third group, and you are locked into California. You have no choice. You have to play by their rules. You have to do it the way they want. I would say if you start preparing now and you prepare for the possibility of the online exam, that's the way to do it. I think a ton of people are going to bail on California, which makes it a desirable place to take the exam if you can get past all the administrative stuff, right? Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I know. It's a lot. So hang in there, everybody, and know that this too shall pass. Somehow it's like, yeah. We'll move on for now, but we will keep you updated next week with any other changes that come through, because I'm sure every week there's going to be something new up through September 30th. I'm sure I'm anticipating changes constantly until we get that last exam finished. So. All right, so I want to switch gears now. We've gotten several messages in the last few days, not surprisingly, from students who are dealing with a lot. They're trying to study at the same time that this pandemic is happening, and then people losing jobs and all this economic mess and health messes. And then to top it off, all of this just horrific violence that's happening with George Floyd, and people feeling a lot of heaviness and sadness. And they're just wondering, what do you even do? How do I keep studying? What's kind of the point of all this, to be honest, with some of this, for students, particularly our Black students who are just feeling really understandably like this is just it's too much right now.
Yeah. Let me start by saying that obviously I'm talking from the point of view of someone who's got a lot of privilege. And so I cannot possibly relate at some level to what's happening here. But I can certainly empathize with the incredible amount of distress, sadness, anger, fear that these events are causing. When you start with the stress of the bar exam, and then you add the pandemic and COVID-19, and then you add on top of that what's been going on in the last few days and weeks, which is certainly not new, but certainly has reignited again in our consciousness. That is a tsunami of emotional inputs that are going to be very tough. And I've gotten a fair number of messages and emails and Facebook messages and comments from our students and others who are really, I think, truly struggling with how to prioritize and put this all together. One of the comments that I got from some students was, I feel guilty studying for the bar in light of all these other things going on. And I know that June, in her mindset coaching last week, this came up, talked with the people on that call. And as always, June had great wisdom. And part of that wisdom was that we need your voice in the bar. We need you to become members of the bar. the rule of law has to still matter. It has to still be important. The reason that Sarah and I started this company 25 years ago was because we felt like there was an underserved voice for people to become members of the bar. People like Megan, who are brilliant and go to great law schools, are going to become members of the bar, always. But there are a lot of people who might not become members of the bar without more assistance and more help, more focused attention. And those voices needed to be heard as well. And so I guess our view at this moment is that your task is now twofold or threefold. It's certainly to stay healthy and safe. It is also to be a responsible member of your community and to speak out for the things that are important to you, whatever they might be. We're not trying to suggest what your politics should be here, but whatever those things are that are important to you, you should be speaking out for them. And that you should be a member of the bar because it gives you a seat at the table and a voice in the discussion that I think is different than if you're not a member of the bar, which is to say, it's not bad to not be a member of the bar, but members of the bar are going to have a bigger voice. And so in this process, I think that you have to do a little bit of compartmentalization. That is, when it's time to study for the bar in a particular day, I think you have to devote yourself to that. I think distracted studying is not very effective, don't you?
Yeah.
Just tough to do that.
Yeah.
But then when that bar study is done for the day or that period of time, throw yourself into the other things that are important to you. We're not asking you to ignore what's going on, either in terms of the pandemic or the activities recently around George Floyd and the other things that are happening there. They are very real and they're omnipresent. Engage in those as you need to engage in them. But when it's time to study, go ahead and give yourself the permission to study, because that is an important part of the long-term process of you becoming a member of the bar. As a company, we want to support you in that journey. We want to do whatever we can. We want you to know, and Megan, you said this better than I can, so maybe I should just let you say it, but we were talking a little bit about safe spaces. Do you want to sort of carry that out?
We did want to just say that this is a company that believes very deeply that the state bars should represent the people. And so that means that we believe very strongly that there need to be more faces of color in the state bar than there is, and in state bar leadership than there is currently. There need to be more women than there are currently. There need to be more LGBTQ, attorneys than there are currently. More immigrants. That we know and believe very deeply in those principles. And so we just want you to know, all of you to know, that this is a place where it's okay to have hard feelings and feel hard things. Coaching calls, that's part of why they're there, because life interrupts, right? Like, you've got this bar study and life will interrupt these studies. And so part of the coaching calls is you can talk about how you're feeling, what's going on. And like Jackson said, June's call, they got to discuss how people were feeling and lament and be sad and process their grief. And that's really important. And we are here for that. This is a safe place for people to feel how they're feeling. And we just want everyone to know that this is something that is deeply important to every member of our team. And we are unified in this, and we are for each one of you in your bar journey. And we are for justice and equality. And yeah, we just grieve. We grieve with everyone who's grieving right now, and recognize that it can feel like the bar doesn't matter right now, but it's really almost matters. It matters more, right? Because you deserve your voice to be a part of your state bar. You deserve a seat at the table. And for far too long, people who do not look like Jackson have been shut out of that room. And we believe, and Jackson believes very deeply, that should not be the case. So this is your way of fighting for justice, is for you to have a seat at the table as well. And we seek to partner with each one of you in that. So.
Yeah, well put. I also want to give you a practical tool to use. We've got in the course, obviously, lots of self-help, self-care videos. You'll find them in your state course module. And we arranged with Learning Strategies for a series of 4 paraliminal recordings. This is 4 recordings that are designed to deal with wellness and calm. I find them very useful. I listen to all 4 of these recordings on a regular basis, and I think they're a great tool to help you sort of center and find your focus in a day, whether it's dealing with health or dealing with the emotion of the things that are going on. And this is a tool that I think is really helpful. We've, as I said, negotiated with Learning Strategies for half off of the normal price, and I would encourage you to take a look at that. Those recordings can be really, really helpful. So I don't know that there's a lot more we can say. I hope that we've given you a sense of our deep concern about this. I would only echo that the group coaching calls are a great place to share that. We do read the comments that you give us. I know Megan's getting them, I'm getting them, June's getting them. Some of you have just said, I just need to vent, and that's fine. You should always feel free to do that. And we're not going to necessarily comment. I don't think it requires a comment from us, but know that we're reading and thinking about it and caring for you. And yeah, our thoughts and prayers clearly are with everybody who's involved in all of this.
All right, one last question. This is from the chat box. Could law schools close down if not in compliance with the new ABA law school pass rate of 75%? Will this impact the bar exam? So I know that 10 law schools were just found to be out of compliance. And so the next step, I believe, is that they're going to have like a hearing where they demonstrate why. So like for one of the schools, I know they're in Puerto Rico, and they're planning on saying that the bar exam was given right after significant hurricanes, where this isn't really a clear demonstration of what their students are capable of. I know there's a lot of different each law school has their own rationale, administrative changes, things like that. But do you have any thoughts, Jackson, on if it will impact the bar exam at all?
Well, I think it could. It strikes me that this is odd timing given the pandemic and online testing and everything else. I honestly think that the ABA is going to have to relax this requirement a bit for a while, and I think there'll be significant pressure on them to do that. For the immediate future, I don't think it has any impact. Okay, I mean, I don't think we're going to have anyone that's been credentialed to take the bar exam losing those credentials, but I do think that over the next year or so, it could have an impact. And I think it goes again to this notion of what is a qualified law school. There have been far too many schools that have been not qualified and have been allowed to go along for a long time. And frankly, without companies like ours to pick up the rate, I don't know how many of those students would graduate, and certainly would graduate, but I don't know how many of them would ever pass the bar. So I think it's significant in the long run, but not in the short run. And again, I would just say, keep your head down and keep working and let this, work itself out, at least for the next few months.
All right. Well, that's all we've got for today.
Wow. Amazing. This was a tough call to have today. We know that this is a hard time. And I don't want to diminish that in any way for anybody, but I do want to leave you with the very clear message that we are here to support all of you. We want to be with you on your journey, and your journey is yours. It's nobody else's. And so we will do everything we can to support you, to encourage you, to help guide you at whatever level of support you want. And that's what we're all here for, whether it's June or Megan or myself or any of our group coaches, all of the people that have been on our Facebook group, all of our alums that hang out. I've seen some of them write some great answers to people this week. And so we really appreciate all of that. And we appreciate all of you, and just encourage you to follow your heart, do the things that are important to you, be the best version of yourself you can be. I think our world needs more of that right now. And just recognize that we will be here as a community to support you as much as we can. And then we'll see you all next Friday, when I'm sure the world will look different again. Right?
Yep. Always does. All right.
Well, that's our episode for this week. Thanks again for being with us. We hope that it was informative and helpful for you. I just want to remind you before we sign off that we've got our free training coming up. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam. You can register by going to the show notes and clicking on the registration button. And even if you can't get to the live showings, you'll get a videotaped replay. But I will tell you that the live Q&A is really one of the great features of this training. And so I hope you'll join us for that. If you need more details about the training, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/now and get all the details and register there as well. All right. Well, thanks for being with us this week. Hope everyone is doing well. Please stay safe, stay healthy, keep studying, and we will see you along the extra mile.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.